Sorry about that, folks. Supreme executive authority is like an ice cream cone. As soon as you get one, everybody wants one. And now, the fanfare. Derick William Dalton is the author of the novel Houses of Common, as well as many short stories to go along with it. He's a professional student who has taken an occasional hiatus from such frivolities as teaching high school science, residential construction, and treating patients as a physician assistant. When not speaking of himself in the third person, he hangs out with his wife and kids and a smart-mouthed turtle. He's also planning a mountain biking trip on the moon. I love that bio, by the way. What does it mean exactly to be a professional student?
Really, it means I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and so I've just kept going back to school. After college, I got a job in a lab PhD program in medical science. I thought it would be really fantastic to teach and do research, and I found out that analyzing sheep urine in a basement lab in Canada during the winter is not a lot of fun. It's also rough on your body's ability to tell when it's time to sleep and when it's time not to. So I changed gears and came back to the United States and did a master's degree in education and got a job teaching high school biology and anatomy and physiology. And I really enjoyed working with high school students, and that was a good 4 years. But I wasn't quite where I felt I wanted to be. I got into PA school and doing that for 6 years now, and I really like that. So I suspect my professional student days are done. But at the same time, I still like pulling out textbooks. I get to go to continuing medical ed classes, and last week I was at one and we were studying disease transmission in a sleep lab setting, and it was cool and gross and useful and fun.
I read on your blog that you were doing an Ironman. Tell me about that.
I was with my wife. We were walking around a park, and it was the day before an Ironman triathlon. And I'd always thought about it. I'd run a marathon before, and the thought of swimming 2.5 miles and then biking 112 and then doing a marathon sounded miserable and awful. But something about it being there, and it was almost like my body made a decision for me without my permission that this is what we're going to do next year. So I started training for it. Things were looking great. The water was 58 degrees that morning, and we had 2-foot swells with white caps, and it turned out okay as far as my speed in the water and the fact that I didn't drown. Everybody was happy about that. But in those races, they've got cutoff points, and if you're not there by a certain time, they pull your timing chip and you're done. So I came out of the water, and I had hypothermia. So I went in there, and I thought I was there about 10 minutes or so, changed, jumped on my bike, took off. And I did the first half of the bike route, 56 miles. And when I got to the end, where you turn around and head back again, the guy stopped me. And it turns out I had missed one of those cutoffs by about 5 minutes. And at first I was really upset and angry because I'd been training for this for 11 months. So I got figuring out what happened on the time. And it turns out in my hypothermic stupor in my brain had been sitting in that tent for 30 minutes. So in one sense, I was as fast as I needed to be on everything, so that was fun, but screwed up because of a dumb newbie mistake. But I'll get it this year. Santa Claus brought me a new wetsuit, so I'm all set.
A professional student who does Ironmans, I guess I should say Ironmen, and writes books, has my attention. Tell me about the premise of your book, Houses of Common.
Some don't hold these truths to be self-evident. So I try to take that idea of men and women are created equal. What would that look like when there's a lot more differences, biologically, different planets, so much different options? So the setting is an alien and some humans that work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they terraform new planets for colonists. And I tried to recreate some of the settings and the conflict I suspect went on based on my understanding of history with colonization of North and South America, what that may have looked like. But now give the bad guys another dose of evil, to use more real modern-day bad guys rather than the James Bond type or cartoony superhero type, to add just a sense of realism. And an alien with a really smart mouth.
Tell me about who your audience is.
My son keeps asking me when he can read it, and I tell him no, not till you're 16, because it's more violent than what I would like him to experience. It's not sexual, and there's not profanity, and it's just something that I really enjoy, and I wanted the science to be really accurate and interesting and fun, but not an integral part of the plot, such that two characters can have a geeky conversation about bacterial genetic engineering, and somebody who doesn't think that's interesting at all but likes the overall story can just say, oh, okay, these two scientists are talking shop, and I don't have to understand it to get what's going on with the whole story and still make the story interesting enough. Kind of like how the first Thor movie was. They threw in enough astrophysics that was accurate and cool to catch the ear of those who were familiar with those things. But if it didn't interest you at all, it was okay because there was a fun story. And then he'd take his shirt off every once in a while, and that'd make lots of people happy. And then Natalie Portman kept smiling, and that made me happy.
So I'm gathering your book could be enjoyed by both young adults as well as older adults, whether or not they have a lot of technical knowledge. If they do, they might enjoy it on a different level. If not, they'll still enjoy the overarching story. Is that correct?
Yeah. Some people really enjoyed the sciencey stuff. I also had some beta readers who don't like science fiction at all particularly, but they said there was enough of everything else that they liked the book.
I love that you start with some context, that you take something we know, the colonization of North America, you apply that to the future. I love that you're not just pulling it out of thin air. I love the idea of the U.S. Department of Agriculture being over terraforming a new planet, how you have very believable systems and terminology put to something very fantastic in the future. So what's the conflict about?
Initially, it's not known. The initial event is the main character, Rannick, who is an alien from another planet, and he has this knack for manipulating bacteria and enabling them to convert what's already on a planet into something that's habitable for humans faster than anybody else. So he's working with some scientists in Ireland, and there is some political unrest similar to the troubles that took place in the past. And because of the changes that are happening, they need to get off planet faster than they hoped. So he is sent to Ireland instead of some exotic planet, and instead of getting to work by himself in peace and develop all this stuff, he's got to go be in the middle of a political mess, and so he's completely out of his element, and he's got to rein in his caustic tongue and try to pull off something amazing. And it doesn't work. Things spiral out of control, and they end up having to all leave Ireland and head towards their new terraformed planet before it's ready. In the meantime, some of his coworkers run into some seemingly unrelated issues on some of their other projects, and as they try to figure out what's going on, they begin to piece together this conspiracy, which I would like to think Chris Carter and Fox Mulder would be proud of.
Speaking of terraforming, I know you've done your research. I was attending one of your writing panels where you were talking about these microbes that can subsist on electrons. Tell me about some of this research you've done about life that could exist on other planets.
The most fascinating part about that research is that all of these ideas for terraforming and what life can actually do that scientists are discovering aren't coming from other planets, but coming from Earth. The example that you mentioned is a bacteria that was found in Michigan, that there was a lot of magnesium being washed into the lake, converting to magnesium oxide. Geologists knew how much of that was going into the lake, but there wasn't the right amount present, and so they realized something's going on here. Bacteriologists realized that that's got to be a living organism causing that, because that's the only thing that can make it happen that fast. And what they discovered is that rather than using carbohydrates like typical bacterial cells or plant and animal cells do, breaking them apart, using the energized electrons to run their cellular machinery, and then dumping it off to an oxygen molecule, that there was a bacteria in the lake that was skipping all of the molecules and just absorbing electrons directly and then exhaling them.
Cool. That's
pretty weird and alien. Stuff along the sea vents at the bottom of the ocean floor that exists, and their whole life cycle and the whole biome is independent of solar energy. Even some eukaryotic and invertebrate species that are part of that. One of my greatest sources for weirdness is one of my college textbooks of invertebrate zoology. There's more sci-fi in there than on Netflix.
Well, you've got me hooked. I'm excited to explore this world where somebody's really done their research, where you know what you're talking about, where we're extending the latest science and applying it forward. That's really exciting. So what are some of the themes that you explore in Houses of Common?
As a former teacher, it was interesting seeing the push to get girls into science, technology, engineering, math, which I am a huge fan of, but also seeing the, not because of that, but along with that, colleges seeing a decrease in males getting in, staying in, getting degrees, going on to graduate school. And if that trend continues, then the future is going to be one in which everybody that's in charge is female because they're the ones that qualified and got the skills. So that shows up a little bit, the changing ethnic diversity of the United States. And also personal relationships are huge. And this was one thing that I found lacking when I first started reading science fiction when I was in middle school and high school. There was lots of really geeky, nerdy, sciencey stuff, which was fun, but it wasn't about the people. And I wanted to make that a bigger part of what it's about. So there's, Rannick's best friend is a human guy, and he's younger than most of the other scientists, and he's got a pretty traumatic backstory, and it interferes with some of his ability to relate to his friends, and it also causes him some issues in his marriage. And that's real, and that makes people and characters real, and it adds another depth to what they're dealing with in the supposedly more important, bigger problems of saving the world. And there's a lot of things in America's history that none of us are proud of, slavery and the civil rights movement. And I thought, what if something happened in the future and we got it right for once? So there's also a character in the book who's a genetically modified bonobo, which is a name for the pygmy chimpanzees. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the IT guys for the terraformation group. So through him, we get to see what I feel things should have looked like for Irish immigrants, Chinese immigrants, Native Americans, African Americans. You could maybe even call it revisionist history, what I think it should have been.
How will we respond when things like that start to happen? If robots take on a full intelligence, what social issues are going to rise about them, or genetically modified animals? So, interesting ideas.
Well, it's fun researching that, and I first got that idea in studying about the neurology of chimpanzees. And their brain structure, their cell structure, it's all identical to humans. The only difference is that their cells stop dividing about 2 weeks earlier in gestation than Homo sapiens brains. So if somebody tweaked that, that's just a hormonal cue, not a structural cue. And suddenly we have this additional sentient race on the planet. And what do you do with that?
Are you a character in this book?
Bill Watterson was once interviewed, and he was asked a similar question. And he said, all the characters are half me. And I think that's a fit. Rannick, the smart-mouth alien, he says the stuff that's in my head that I keep to myself so I can maintain my relationships and keep my job. There's another alien species that's the boss that runs the Office of Terraformation, and she has this fear of failure that she doesn't let anybody see, and so she comes across as kind of cold and unfeeling sometimes. The character that's the genetically modified chimpanzee has a wife and a bunch of kids. I know what it's like trying to raise kids, and how more difficult would it be if they were a bunch of crazy monkeys. So there's a little bit of me in all of them. But the one that was most like me, I suspect, is a minor character that's a surgical assistant, and he's involved in trying to put one of the characters back together after his car is mauled on the freeway.
Tell me about your writing process. Have you faced any challenges when you were trying to write this novel?
The biggest one is just having the time to do it and make sure it's not taken away from things that are more important. My sister's a novelist also, and she's working on getting her first one published, and she's just about finished writing the sequel to it. And she mentioned to me once that she doesn't want her kids to look at that book and have them think of a mom that was not there. She doesn't want to have that memory, wow, look at this cool thing mom got to do, but now that it took away from what to her is more important, being there for the kids. So there's that issue. Then there's real life that keeps getting in the way of everything we want to do. I recently changed jobs and moved, and that set me back a little bit. But overall, it's something that I just like the whole process of it. And so even though the end result doesn't always happen when I want it to happen, I like what I'm doing in the meantime. I think that's also what helped me to only be furious for about 5 minutes with the Iron Man situation last year is I enjoyed the training and I enjoyed how I felt getting faster and stronger.
So whether or not you become a New York Times bestselling author, you can still find fulfillment in the journey of writing.
The process of writing is one that I find enjoyable, independent of the end result of holding the published book in my hand. Editing is a little bit too much fun because sometimes I find I've read for 3 pages and haven't changed anything that I'm reading for enjoyment. I have to go back and pick up where I left off.
Don't you hate that?
Yeah. But